An essentialist art style, a dystopian atmospheric landscape, and an intriguing but obscure gameplay narrative balance that blends so well together it's still speculated years later what the meaning of it all was. These are the ingredients that make up a compelling and unforgettable experience. These are the things that make up Inside, the game I'll be diving into today. Welcome to the second episode of Indie Hour. Although I am crafting this to be an individual series of videos to be watched with no dedication to having seen any of the others, in this particular instance I do recommend you check out episode 1 where I analyse Limbo. I say this because today's episode is focusing on Playdead's second title, Inside, acting as their first game's spiritual successor. Inside was released in June of 2016, 6 years after Limbo. Development began practically immediately after completion and release of that game, and although they're made very similarly, Inside is definitely a step up in terms of scope and budget. Parallels can be drawn from the very beginning of the game, as our protagonist, a nameless boy, slides down an incline into a forest scene where we begin our experience in typical Playdead fashion. I say that based on their one other game where the beginning also happens to be like this, although I will feel incredibly vindicated if their next one also follows this trend. As with Limbo, the details of this game are restricted, and its description reads as follows. Hunted and alone, a boy finds himself drawn into the centre of a dark project. It feels and plays very similar to Limbo, as you'd expect a spiritual successor to do, and you can tell this from the very first minute of playtime. First thing you notice is the fact that graphically things are vastly improved, with this game having full 3D models and environments formed with enough geometric shapes but still retaining a key aspect of what made Playdead's first game great, a very minimalist approach to everything, with the details in this world only being of immersive or practical necessity. The clean and simple art style, along with the muted lighting, help communicate a sense of familiarity for those who have played Limbo, but still let Inside have an identity of its own. With Limbo, its colour palette stuck to its blacks, whites and greys, which it benefited from given its respective tone, story and art direction. Inside, however, brings more colour into its own world, whilst retaining the same vibe with its sparse light sources and mainly neutral colour palette. It takes a step up from its predecessor, but only to the necessary degree to keep things tonally appropriate. The gameplay remains as a platform and puzzle side-scroller, just in a deeper 2.5D world as opposed to Limbo's completely two-dimensional landscape. The camera trajectory and the implemented way that it crawls along and pulls back is certainly another level up, playing with the benefits of a more three-dimensional space not achieved in Limbo, which allows for a far more immersive cinematic experience. In our first chapter, we have basic gameplay introductions, following the same precise design Playdead have now set as their norm, with only 3 possible options on your controller and simple but obvious environmental prompts to nudge the player into figuring out movement for themselves as the story of Inside begins to take form. For a brief second, we see a lorry loaded with people ready up and drive off from the centre of the forest before finding 2 people out in the dark, equipped with torches and clearly on the lookout. Our protagonist's body language acts as a core component when it comes to this game's storytelling, with the boy's behaviour already helping clue us in on key details of the narrative. The fact he is alone, at night in a forest, with no material possessions other than the shirt on his back, and is now immediately positioning himself crouching behind objects, tell the player all they need to know. From the beginning moments of the game, the boy is committed to keeping himself hidden from these figures, and our first and most important goal of the game is communicated to us. Remain out of sight at all costs. As you continue onwards, you realise that, unlike Limbo, where the other occupants of the world you encounter are trying to deter you away from them at any given moment, the lens with which they approach Inside is flipped. The threats of this world aren't wanting to avoid you here, but rather actively pursuing you at all times. Dogs are on guard and will be sent to hunt you down, with this group soon enough discovering your presence and beginning to chase you. The initial pursuit through the woods begins a section that spikes your adrenaline, as it's littered with environmental puzzles to overcome, which you will fail on your first attempt. This learning by dying type of puzzle solving makes a return from their last game, but here you definitely have more trial and error to overcome than before, whilst retaining the fact that you never get penalised for each death, returning close by to a previously completed section, as you'd expect. In-game puzzles like these, whether they be action set pieces or more head-scratching, time-forgiving problems you'll solve later on, they're both as thoughtfully crafted as the other here by Playdead, with the level design having a great deal of care put into making sure there is a precise balancing of fun and frustration with each problem you come across. This goes for any game with puzzle solving, to be honest. The player should always be making progress with each attempt or failure they run into, making them thought-provoking yet not difficult to a degree where you find yourself getting frustrated with the game itself. Games are, above all else, meant to be an enjoyable form of entertainment, and if you fail at this, which many games do by forcing you to look up a guide for it only to discover the puzzle in question had some bullshit solution you never would have thought of in 1,000 tries, you've made a bad puzzle, full stop. Playdead games thankfully never run into this issue, and pacing is rarely, if ever, affected by failure. Failure is in fact very much encouraged and part of the fun, with creative, comedic, and brutal death scenarios playing out in an aesthetically satisfying way. Which sounds a bit sadistic out loud, but it's a video game, so you know what I mean. They continue their trademark design of environments remaining minimal, and yet the problems you face, although becoming obvious upon completion, are still complex, even ridiculously obvious ones, like this here fence. I considered in what way I would destroy it before realising I was just able to climb over it, the simplest solution in this instance being the correct one. It's at this area of the game you begin to realise that it wasn't just the forest lacking life, but everywhere. The wilderness is one thing, but why, I asked myself, do these established areas of farmland have no signs of activity in the slightest? The atmosphere is perfectly encapsulated in this eerie, disturbing, silent landscape, with damp fields laid with fog that seem to go on forever. The post-apocalyptic vibes begin to set in here as you're overcome with this melancholic sense of loneliness, surrounded only with heaps of dead livestock littering the farmland. Whatever happened to this world for it to have ended up in this state? Jesus Christ. That pig scared the hell out of me. I really just froze up there and let it run me down. What is it with Playdead and maggots, man? This barn is where the story of Inside begins to properly piece itself together. The lamp-like device hanging from above by a wire, once interacted with, brings to life the previously inconsequential crouched figures in the background, as our mind is linked with the suspended helmet above, thereby gaining control over them. This is one of the more unique gameplay mechanics you'll come across frequently in the game, and the puzzles they form around this contraption are honestly great fun to work through. The further you progress, the more you learn the rules and possibilities regarding the mind control devices, including a point where things get real interesting once the concept of mind control within mind control introduces itself in an Inception-like manner. Inception. I don't know, guys. You like that one? As for the devices, we know what they are and do, but not why they are. The question remains as to who created them and how are they even linking with these people. And why don't these lot have control over their own minds when the boy does? Once you leave the farmland area, you come across a huge, hulking, industrial-sized warehouse with the mindless queued up outside, waiting by the looks of things to be processed through the entrance, us finding a more subtle way around them. You then reach a threshold of the game wherein you get closer towards the city, with the world here, much like the farmland, remaining abandoned. These completely dilapidated warehouses and industrial complexes are barely holding together, seemingly left unkept for an extended amount of time, with work that was done here having been completed or simply abandoned a long time ago. Once you reach the central city, you begin to conjure a better sense of what kind of world you are truly inhabiting, outside of the fog-filled forests and farmlands. Endless streams of marching, mind-controlled individuals are guided through the streets. Being observed by guards and cameras, the boy remains just out of sight in the alleyways. The question of why the world exists in this state in terms of game development can be put down to much of it being inspired by analog equipment and iconography from the Cold War era. This design gives a sense of obsoleteness to the world, with a foreboding backdrop encapsulating connotations of control, surveillance, and oppression. This translates well in game, with plenty of examples showcasing this era's inspiration respectively, in things such as the computers, electrical equipment, and the brutalist architecture spread throughout the cityscape. This rather deserted world also benefits from a fantastic sound design and music score. Given the landscape is so void of life and motion, it's understandable there is plenty of space to fill, both in terms physically and audibly when it comes to the world of Inside. Vast open areas are perfect for the high-grade sound effects that echo through enclosed rooms and empty city streets. The jingling of chains, shattering of flower pots, and clunking of machinery are also aesthetically pleasing through whatever your audio setup is. Sound design goes far beyond the normal measures though. The care Playdead put into blending sound and gameplay is second to none here, as when engaged in one of these high octane sequences for example, the boy switches into a panic state. His heavy rhythmic breathing and drumbeat of the backing soundtrack are synced together, tying his emotional distress to the appropriate music. Personally, I love whenever the creative decision is made to tie together the gameplay and narrative. I just think ideas like this have such a cool concept and design, it just does something for me. Details don't end there though. The boy himself, when in situations such as mid-jump, if he is inhaling, won't exhale until he lands, and vice versa, if he is exhaling, he will perform a quick inhale as you hit the jump button. The intensity of his physical exertion and emotion are defined depending on the context of the scene playing out and its environmental parameters. Physical exertion itself is shown through his detailed animations. The speed and weight of his chest collapsing under each breath also depend on how much you've run and the intensity of the situation. I bring up these small details because 1, I've watched far too many developer conferences on this game to not mention them to some degree in this video, but 2, these details simply aren't seen elsewhere. Despite games being pumped out from much larger AAA or even self-proclaimed quadruple A developers with far higher budgets at their disposal, I believe other companies simply don't care when it comes to the polish of their games, whereas the gamers over at Playdead certainly do, and people should know just how many layers there are when it comes to perfecting a vision in game development. My little newfound interest for behind the scenes development truly makes me respect what goes into making a title you would think to be simpler to execute, like Inside. Visual storytelling is so important to Playdead, and here things stood out to me when it came to the complexities of development. Anti-aliasing, for example, is one of the components that make the game feel so smooth to play, since it isn't just down to animations, although, don't get me wrong, they are smooth and blended together flawlessly. It's through interweaved layers of graphical detail with processes like temporal reprojection, edge motion, and motion blurring, which result in shadows, lighting, and reflections all benefiting and delivering a far smoother experience for the player. Now, if you're not a game dev like me, you also probably have no clue what any of this crap actually means. My point of this tangent though is, there's a reason these games feel like art, and there's a reason Inside won Best Indie Game of 2016, which I was yet to mention, and that's because when you dive into what goes into them, even if you don't understand any of it, the final product shows it deserves that credit, and deserves the title of art, from the amount of effort put into making it play so silky just for our 2 little eyeballs we experience games through.
Hydrobot, taking it to the next level, that was sick!
I've always known what I liked about games from studios such as Playdead. They have smooth, well-blended animations, engaging gameplay, and are overall just a well-made and polished final product. But now I'm familiar with a term for all that: game feel. When you achieve this, you get that vibe from a game you don't quite capture from every release on the market. That kind of feeling through which you can get so immersed in simple actions you're partaking in is a rarely fulfilled accomplishment in the industry, sadly. When you learn just how small the team is and how much time and effort is put into crafting their end result, it shows you why this 3-hour game took 6 years of development, despite its smaller scope. And it's because perfecting their vision takes time, and wanting to get it right is so damn admirable. There is more I want to touch on regarding the game's development, but for now I'll return to the story. Venturing further into the city, you do your best to avoid capture, from these creepy surveillance robots here, and from the people in control themselves, but soon enough you'll inevitably end up falling into danger. This is one of the more creative sections of the game, not that there's ever a dull moment anyway, where you're forced into acting like one of the mindless. I call them the mindless since we don't actually know their names, and at many points of the game we obviously control their minds, so I'm not really sure what else to call them otherwise. Lots of them are wearing dungarees like they'd be performing manual labour, so what? The working class? Maybe the game is just an allegory for, I don't know, the elitist boot stamping down on the proletariats. In any case, this section provides some visual exposition for us in what we know about the mindless. Since the boy is observed by the security drone, we must make him fall into line and perform exactly as the others surrounding him do, lest he get noticed for having free will. Here you'll notice you're actually performing not just for the cameras, but for an onlooking crowd. A group who have travelled here to, if I were to take a guess, observe for themselves some of the available stock. This rather disturbing scene opens up another question for the player. We know the mindless are husks of humanity, and others, us included, have their minds still. But what qualifies you for disqualification of your own free will? From observation, we can see that babies and children accompanying the adults too. Why is the world so cruel to have left our protagonist in his position, whilst other boys his age are free? You'll also notice they all wear masks, even the children, to protect their identity, or the opposite maybe, identifying them all as part of the same cult-like class above the rest. Soon after, you'll find the first of a new puzzle where, as I mentioned earlier, the game decides you're too adept with how well you know how to play and decides to introduce another level of body controlling to familiarise yourself with. The 3 levels of mind control is when the game gets more interesting, surprising you when you thought you were acquainted with the game and had nothing left to learn. Inside constantly keeps you guessing, thus keeping the tightly knit together experience it delivers always engaging. After finding yourself descending into the sewers, you're met with new water-based levels to work with, learning of the existence of buoyant objects and how their physics factor into puzzle solving, along with wild dogs, of which I learned the hard way that water is no obstacle for them, as they can apparently swim too. Noted. Once you've reached as far as you can in the sewer, your journey below doesn't stop there, as you take the captain of a one-buoy submersible and brave the depths further under the city, into an even older, abandoned layer of the world. Bursting through a boarded up crevice, you are met with a huge open void of negative space, which, despite having been built into a 2D side-scroller, Playdead utilises immensely well in this game, to give a harrowing sense of size to the environments you find yourself in. The camera pulls back as your screen is drenched in pitch black darkness, with only a single beam of light to guide your path, the only set dressing being some potentially submechanophobia-inducing pipes in the backdrop to really give the sense of how much smaller the player is right now, surrounded by nothingness. Deeper you go, eventually having to exit the submersible periodically to reach places it can't venture within the tiled remains of the Undercity, having to solve obstacles in your path, all while hoping your breath lasts long enough to reach the safety of the— No, what is that in the water? This creature's reveal plays into the mildly horror-esque themes of Playdead games, acting as a perfect jump scare, but whilst remaining at a safe distance from where we are on screen as the player. We know it isn't a direct threat at this point, but now we're aware that something else is down here with us. Making your way through the ruins and doing your best to avoid the grudge, you resurface at the entrance of an abandoned mine. I mean, everything is abandoned in this game, I don't know why I need to keep saying that. And we're met again with a huge, overwhelmingly empty space and rickety machinery. In this section, you travel the various levels of the mine, solving smaller problems as you come across each area. The first powering up a device that displays the number 19, having to work out what that means. Equipping ourselves with another mind control helmet, you realise your ultimate goal of gathering enough mindless bodies to activate the pressure plate, opening the huge secure doors to a noisy and unknown area that lies behind them. And so, you set off to get all the gamers together. 19 being the total you need for you to get inside. Oh hey, I just got that. The final guy you need, unfortunately being a bit worse for wear, but hey, it wouldn't be a Playdead game without dragging about a corpse or two, am I right? Finally gaining access to the thunderous room behind these doors, we make our way through one of the largest and most mysterious spaces in the game. This area has an unexplained cycle of shockwaves that occur on a continuous loop, and if the boy is caught out of cover when one triggers, he will be decimated into tiny pieces from the blast. This method to master here is timing your runs between objects. Not only is this section super creative, but the way the soundtrack is incorporated into these constant recurring deaths is more attention to details others don't consider. The music being continuous and not clipping back to an earlier point along with the rest of the game wasn't an easy task, but it was essential in making sure the loop was as organic and seamless as possible, so the constant repeated deaths were not punishing or jarring to the player.
One sec, okay? I found this on the web for this area has an unexplained cycle of shock waves that occur in a continuous loop, and if the boy—
The music itself was done by returning composer Martin Stig Andersen, and you can tell he's back. His ethereal soundtrack he's composed here definitely gives you similar vibes to that of Limbo, but it still holds a very different identity to tell a story of its own. Much like Limbo, the music created for Inside isn't exactly music in the traditional sense. It's more backing tracks that consist of an arrangement of distorted hums and sound effects put together not to accompany the game through epic action set pieces or anything, but to act as another layer of the world and by effect its storytelling. For Inside, Martin was inspired by 1980s B-movie horrors and used synthesizers before running the audio through a human skull and recording the hang on, wait, what? A skull? Inside soundtrack came from within an actual human skull? What the hell? Eventually all the teeth fell out because of the vibrations. Oh my god. Ah! This isn't the first time our friend here has made use of more unconventional methods as a sound designer. I failed to mention in my Limbo review, because I didn't know about it, that he ran some of his sound design that plays right around the hotel section through an antique magnetic wire recording from the 20th century. This contextual immersion from the sound also carries with it a somewhat diegetic nature with what we see on screen in the electrical hotel sign, reflected within his music that's also being run through diminished electrical equipment. You gotta respect his dedication to not shy away from his vision for a less mainstream electroacoustic soundtrack that he crafted for both these titles, rather than favouring a more generic approach to music, with less distortion to appeal to more of a mass audience. In my opinion, it's only a good thing when we get more pieces of media conceptualised and executed with the goal of appealing to a specific audience who will appreciate these nuances, even if it does mean using literal human remains to achieve said goals. We've reached out to Anderson to find out more about where and how he acquired the skull. So wait, he didn't even say where he got it? Whose skull was it, Martin? You're gonna get haunted by somebody. We next have a chapter where we have to narrowly avoid another one of these black-haired underwater ghouls by duping it out and swimming for your life whenever you get a chance. Now, this is where, like Limbo, the game isn't exactly horror, but Christ is it stress-inducing from these creepy sections. The fact you're helpless in the water too, and this grudge girly here keeps swimming faster than us, doesn't help with that. Eventually though, our protagonist slips up on a climb and falls. The creature we've been fearing for the second portion of the game clinging to us and dragging us down as we gasp for air, certain that we've met a watery grave. Or so you're led to believe, as through the flickers of light we see the creature attach a cord to the boy. Then, settling to the bottom of the floor, he awakens again, as him and the player are left to realise he's been gifted with the ability to breathe underwater, much like the creatures who watch on. Have they made us one of them now? We swim, now unburdened by lung capacity, through the lower remains of this facility, passing through operating theatres submerged with what must be the last experiments done in them, with a less than lucky patient floating above the operating table. Resurfacing and entering another strange room, new rules are introduced yet again, as water now rests above us on the roof of the ceiling. Bodies float submerged, alive and twitching, with partially missing body parts or parts yet to be grown. Soon we reach the final stretch, gazing out of an office window towards the centre of this medical facility as the workers who would be at these desks rush towards something to bear witness. Now, this is where I'm going to offer a spoiler warning for those of you who have yet to play the game. Do give it a go, don't let me spoil the ending for you, it's a better experience for yourself. Come on back to the video when you've played the whole thing, it's only a few hours long. Descending to the lower levels with some help from some of our new friends, these ones you'll notice not requiring a mind control helmet when following you. Perhaps after whatever the freaky girl in the water did to the boy, he now has a stronger bond with these lot. Heading inside, we find not just some, but every workstation abandoned, phones dangling from their cords, as if everyone simply upped and left at a moment's notice. The next room we enter has more operating theatres, with indistinguishable creatures swaying back and forth mindlessly, with chairs and cameras ready for an audience, but no audience in sight. We find them gazing into a tank, which the boy approaches with no restraint from anyone working here, as if they couldn't be less fazed by his presence. Peering through the glass, however, proves to still be too dark for us to see anything. We must get closer. Climbing up and over through ventilation and around this orb containing the mystery which everyone seems transfixed on, we finally find a way into the contraption, being sucked into the tank where the boy is stripped of his clothes, and we find this in the centre. A huge amalgamation of flesh, resulting in an abhorrent cluster of dangling body parts, pale skin and wincing moans, all behaving dynamically but coexisting as one single being. Why create such an abomination? Also, if this reminds you of the Rat King from The Last of Us 2, remember, Playdead did it here first. As we remove the helmets grafted to its body, the boy is pulled inside the huddle, leading us to gain control over it. I guess the whole being drawn into a dark project was more literal than it made out to be. With nothing else to do other than escape, we pull on the panel mounted on the window, cracking the glass, causing the huddle to tumble outwards. Stampading through the labs, smashing through anything in its path, we gain insight into just how much strength this thing has compared to what we did previously. Tearing doors off, crashing through floors and ripping out machinery, the player's goal now is to journey through the lab, just pushing further onwards. Eventually reaching who I can only assume to be the CEO, cowering in fear of a creation he likely greenlit. Colliding with him, we smash out his window, crushing him in a bloody splatter on the facility floor, probably the least he deserves. The puzzles here either require your strength as the huddle or your patience. Most of the workers have stood back as we have torn through their place of work, not stopping us however, just watching, examining the results of their work. This person, however, opens a door we couldn't have otherwise gained entry through. More workers help us later on too, activating a device to help us through another door. Do they feel bad for what they created, or were they only forced to in the first instance, now taking the chance to attempt to make amends? Finally, we reach the edge of the poorly boarded up outskirts of the facility, and using the huddle's immense strength, we burst through the final barrier keeping us imprisoned, collapsing down the forest incline and coming to a stop in a solitary ray of sunlight that shines down onto us. Finally, your journey reaches its end. The wind blows, the water gently laps at the shore, and we finally have found our freedom outside. The question in this story I feel leaves you with is one asking how this ending truly came about. The underlying themes of free will and control are prevalent throughout the entirety of the game, but did we ever truly have any ourselves? Given how welcome we were to escape towards the end, it makes you wonder whether the scientists were simply seeing what their creation was ultimately capable of. A diorama of the woodland outskirts that we collapse into within the facility could be hinting at where they possibly predicted, or perhaps even manipulated, the huddle to end up at. Was the entire escape planned? Did we even reach the real outside, or was this area also manufactured? Did the boy even have free will of his own, or was he a conduit, not being guided towards the huddle by the player or the scientist, but controlled by the huddle itself, using its situation of multiple mind-controlling devices connected to a single consciousness to reach out and guide the boy towards itself? Its last hope to free itself from torment, and only once consuming him, being able to escape? Much like Playdead's first game, Inside leaves its narrative open-ended to interpretation, with the player simply meant to be left wondering. This has left much speculation over the years as to the game's true meaning, and plenty of theories have spawned from it, only getting more complex and metatextual when you consider the incredibly difficult to attain alternate ending that's possible by disabling a number of power sources hidden throughout the game, which I didn't attempt, but you can take a look at for yourself if you feel so inclined. I think it's clear I adore Playdead and all the minds that work on their games. It's been such a blast making this video and looking into them as a company to see why they create what they create and the attention that is poured into their games. I cannot wait for whatever title they have in store next for us, and going off the 6-year development time between Limbo and Inside, I might be getting my hopes up for it to be revealed sooner rather than later. The only thing we know about Game 3, as they are tentatively calling it, are a few promotional screenshots off their website and a short description stating, "Our current project is a third-person science fiction adventure set in a remote corner of the universe." Blending sci-fi with Playdead's formula sounds like the coolest thing they've envisioned so far, and their expertise with crafting lonely, barren landscapes sounds so damn perfect when matched with an unexplored planet across the stars. I absolutely cannot wait to see it officially revealed. I think that brings us to the end of the video. This one was a bit longer than last episode, but I had a lot to say on Inside, so if you didn't like that, well, I guess you shouldn't have watched it. For those who did watch, thank you very much. I'm very grateful, and I'll see you for another one soon. Bye.